Chiropractic, has been around since the late 1800s. And when it first began, when it was first started by D.D. Palmer, its founder, he had believed in the idea that chiropractic was multifaceted. It had a mechanical component to it, it had an emotional component to it, and it had a nutritional one. At that time, he worked on diet and things of that nature. For the emotional side, he really worked on what he termed autosuggestion at the time, talking to the person, talking to the body, because he learned that if you say bad things to someone, it can influence them. Well, if you teach them the right thing or you say good things while you're doing corrections, the brain's like, wow, this is amazing. That's been lost. His son took over the profession around 1910 and didn't like the idea of getting into the idea that there's a mind-body. He wanted to focus on body only. But his father, who invented the profession, said, no, you can't separate the two. It's mind and body, and they work together in a harmony. And if you ignore one, you don't get the results. So really, for the last almost 100 years, the chiropractic profession as a whole has ignored the mind component. Now, I was fortunate enough, my grandfather, who was influenced heavily by D.D. Palmer, the founder, and then another doctor named Thurman Fleet, they were together, they were friends, and he said, look, we got to keep this in here. So between my uncles and my grandfather, the style of chiropractic I learned came out of those roots. It came out of the idea that you're not just this mechanical thing that needs to be adjusted a certain way and you just see what the parts do when you move them. You have to focus on the mind as well. So the techniques you do, there's numerous ones out there. And today a lot of the schools teach roughly 3. You'll see something called diversified that'll be out there. You will see an activator technique that's with a tool, and you'll see some kind of an upper cervical technique. Those are probably the big 3 that you see across the board. The problem with all of those techniques, and there's nothing wrong with how the technique's done, they disconnect from the mind. And it's the biggest flaw in chiropractic today. Now, as far as techniques go, in our practice, we use 15 or 16 different adjusting styles. Most chiropractors know one. And then they'll borrow a little bit from a piece here, a piece there, but they don't really know true systems. I was fortunate that my mentors, from Victor Frank to my Uncle James and John and my grandfather, they all had different tools that they delved into me and gave me this experience. And because of this, it's put me in a position when I'm treating a patient or I'm adjusting, it's a different animal. It's a different ball game. One of the things I like to say a lot of times, when you're looking at the profession as a whole, we oftentimes think, oh, okay, adjusting in chiropractic. Well, I know a chiropractor, or I know someone that adjusts and something of that nature. And the difference is, it's like a sport. If you play basketball, for example, my son, he's 13, right? He's going into 7th grade. Connor plays basketball, and he could tell me how to pass and how to shoot and how to dribble, but he's not Michael Jordan. It's a different level of basketball. And in my opinion, the majority of the profession will never graduate beyond the junior high or high school level. When it comes to chiropractic care, because of my background, because of the knowledge, because of my work in bone setting and other fields that involve manipulation and adjusting, we're playing at an MBA professional level, and our results show it. We get better results really than everybody else. So when the field of chiropractic was invented, especially when D.D. Palmer came up with this, and this was his model, right? He said, we're more than just parts, right? There's a whole piece of this body. Again, mind and body. So you had to focus on the anatomy. And along the way over the years, and this is my opinion on things, I always wondered why our profession changed. I think back to my grandfather, and I think back to the miracles that came out of our profession. You go back 60, 70 years ago, all you heard was these amazing things that they could do for blood pressure and skin conditions and GI problems and all this stuff. And I thought, I don't hear that anymore. And I started wondering why. What happened to those days? What happened to those times? And I started looking at it. I noticed that insurance really got into the game years ago. Back in the 60s, you didn't have a whole lot of it. 70s, all of a sudden, here comes insurance. But when they got involved with the chiropractic profession, they said, look, we'll pay you guys, but we don't want you adjusting a knee or a hip. We don't want you really messing around with the GI tract. We don't want you, trying to fix blood pressure and do things naturally. We'd like you to stay in the spine, the neck, the back, the low back, right? We want you to stay there. Well, then as the 70s went on, and they were writing blank checks at this time, the 80s was considered the golden time of the chiropractic profession. You could see somebody for whatever you wanted, charge insurance, whatever you wanted, they'd write you a check. And guys were doing fantastic. But the problem was, as they started narrowing their focus from what my grandfather and his peers and mentors once did, where we were whole body, we were physicians. As we boxed ourselves into the spine, all of a sudden we started getting into trouble because that skill set started to disappear. And as those doctors died off, we started losing those skills. Well, then the 80s rolled around and the insurance industry's like, okay. 90s come and they're like, we're done. We're done paying everybody. And it wasn't just chiropractic, it was all of healthcare, all of medicine. They're like, we're finished. And you guys will get paid, but only if you do neck or only if you do low back. Don't mess in the middle. Don't mess with any other systemic type conditions. You're musculoskeletal doctor only, and you're only spine. So the guys are like, hey, we want to get paid. Fine, we'll do that. Now here you have a problem. You've got all these doctors that are going through, and the doctors in the 40s, the 50s, and the 60s who had all that clinical experience, they start dying out. And so you got all these guys who boxed and narrowed their focus over the last several decades. They're the only ones left. And they now start going back and teaching at the universities. So the skill set has died out and gone. These guys only know this narrow parameter. Well, as we go further and further along, it just got narrowed even more. And we saw this in the 90s when they put the clamps to it with the insurance. About half the profession folded up overnight. It disappeared because they didn't have the skills or the ability to succeed. You know, if you look at the chiropractic profession, there's roughly 50, 60,000 chiropractors in this country. I graduated school over 20 years ago. There were 50,000 then. There are multiple schools, 14, 15 of them. They turn out probably 10,000 doctors a year on average, give or take. And you look at that and you start thinking to yourself, wait a minute, if we're turning out 10,000 a year, 20 years, that's a lot more than 50,000. Either the profession is doing so amazingly wonderful that the guys can retire in 5 years, or a lot of them don't make it. And the failure rate in the profession right now is 80%, according to the school statistics. So if you have an 80% failure rate, you wonder why. Because your skill level that you used to have is no longer there. And so what they're teaching you now is very rudimentary skills, but it's not enough to really get over the hump and help patients. You have to be full body. You have to be what the founder of the profession envisioned. He envisioned that we were natural, holistic physicians. They had hospitals years ago that were chiropractic only, that treated everything that walked in the door, right? All of this was narrowed again, in my opinion, because of the money, right? Guys chase the dollar. It was the wrong reason. We need to get back to the healthcare that we were taught and trained to do.